This week, I started by writing about Energy Vault. It's a company with a new take on a timeless principle around energy storage. There's basically these modules of elevator banks, but rather than lifting and lowering people, these are lifting and lowering what the company calls mobile masses. So it's just a way to convert excess renewable energy into potential energy, and then you can deploy it as kinetic energy later on. What I wrote about was not whether this one particular approach or even this one particular company is all that exciting. There's a lot that goes into that. But just the idea that there are companies like this that are exploring new ways to take advantage of timeless physical principles to store energy, because that's at the moment seems to be one of the hardest parts of this energy transition is we can generate so much renewable energy, but we cannot reliably generate it exactly when we need it. So we need to be able to store it. We need to be able to store it cleanly. We need to be able to store it efficiently. And that whole energy storage space is a pretty interesting space to play in right now. And so the first post was all about Energy Vault. My second post was about the spills of hazardous liquids here in the US. So I looked at a data set from the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration showing the count of spills of hazardous liquids in the US over the past decade or so, and the released volumes in those spills, the unintentional released volumes in those spills. And what we see is the spill counts have actually been going down. And that's not surprising because we're getting better about understanding what causes leaks and spills and how to manage against those. The challenge is the spilled volumes really aren't coming down nearly as much as the spill counts. And largely, I'm speculating that's because even one spill can just turn into a massive event, right? Once something has spilled, we can't really reliably understand whether it's going to be a contained event, so a small scale event, or whether it turns into something that's much more problematic. So the idea is we have to attack spills relentlessly for a couple of reasons. One is they can turn into massive environmental and health and safety risks that we simply just can't take on. The other is these hazardous liquids are going to be part of our economy for decades in the future, no matter how the energy transition plays out. We're going to have an important component of the economy that will be liquids based for a long time to come. And so we have to make sure that we're not overlooking the concerns around the spills that we're having with hazardous liquids in the US. My third post this week was about how oil prices have effectively crashed, not really, but they've come down really hard over the first part of this week. And, I came across a couple of explanations that, just weren't all that compelling, that maybe has something to do with, say, the OPEC upcoming meeting, that there might be an unfavorable resolution to that. And so as a result, oil prices should come down a fair bit. And so what I did is the explanations I was hearing, the rumors I was hearing just weren't compelling. So I went back to the macroeconomy and I looked at the tool called GDP Now, which is a nowcast of GDP from the Atlanta Fed. And what that showed is that there was a substantial step down in the nowcast for GDP just in the past week or so. And there was a slew of macroeconomic data that came out on Friday, May 26th. And that's what moved the nowcast down by a whole percentage point from nominally a 3% nowcast to a 2%. So my guess is that the same macroeconomic data that led to this data model reducing its expectation of GDP is what oil traders were looking at and decided, okay, there's some real macroeconomic weakness out there now that we didn't see circa even a week ago, much less a month or a quarter ago. And that's what caused oil prices to come back down. That may be also what causes OPEC Plus to decide to do another cut if there are broader concerns on the demand side. So it didn't look like any one particular data point got all that interesting. The point was there was a slew of macroeconomic data that have come out over the past week, and it looks like in aggregate, those are pointing in a negative direction for oil demand. My next post was about a podcast that I did. I was interviewed on the Oil and Gas News Network's HSE podcast. So I talked with Russell Stewart about industrial reliability, and that's what I do in my day job at Pinnacle. We talked about industrial reliability and specifically its effects on health, safety, and environment, HSE. So it's just a 20-minute conversation. It's really easy to listen to. If you have any interest in industrial reliability, if you have any interest in HSE, if you have any interest in the kinds of stuff that I've been writing about or what I do for my day job, I definitely encourage you to listen to that one. It was a lot of fun. It was a real fun conversation for me to have with Russell. My last two posts of the week were all about new power data that we got out of the US EIA. And what I was looking at was first planned retirements of power plants between 2023 and 2030. And then we see that the US at the moment plans to retire about 0.7 gigawatts per month of electric capacity. And a huge fraction, I think it's 95% of that, is basically coming from coal or natural gas. Then in the Friday post, I looked at the flip side of that, which is the new plant additions that currently are hitting the US EIA's radar. And we're looking at adding 1.7 gigawatts of capacity between now and 2030 on a monthly basis. And here, the bulk of this is coming from wind, from solar, from nuclear, from battery storage. And so my point was we're seeing a 1 gigawatt net add in electric capacity per month, which is about in line with what the EIA's demand forecast growth shows. And so the point there is we are seeing the transition of the US electricity infrastructure happening right underneath our feet. Every month we're churning out more of the coal plants, of the natural gas plants that can no longer compete because they're too old or they're inefficient or they're just not being deployed often enough. And we're seeing new builds pretty aggressively, solar, wind, battery, and even in some cases nuclear. So another interesting week in the energy transition. As always, I put together a free weekly newsletter that I send out on Saturdays, where I include links to and summaries of all the research notes that I share during the week. I also include an energy-related anecdote, insight, or observation, and I only share it inside the newsletter. So that way, even if you see everything else that I've shared online, you certainly will have not seen that because I don't put it anywhere except the newsletter. And this week, I wrote about the new nuclear plant in Georgia, and it has now, the Unit 3 out there has hit 100% of its power capacity. And I wrote about what that means and how that might impact the narrative that we have around nuclear power, because there's a lot going on out there, a lot to be optimistic about, but there's plenty of reasons to be pessimistic as well. So that was my anecdote in this week's newsletter. So if you're interested in any of that, feel free to sign up. It's free. I'll include the link in the comments below. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll talk soon.